Hello everybody, my name is Chris Campbell. I am an undergraduate researcher with the University of Texas at San Antonio, and today I'm going to be presenting my independent research project titled Storm Magnitude and Direction Changes in San Antonio Due to Urban Heat Island Effect. Just a little background on this project. Kind of started out as what I would consider more of like a funny joke, and I mean that in the most professional way possible. If you live in San Antonio or maybe other urban regions, you'll notice there's this kind of funny rhetoric about storms, especially here in South Texas, as they approach the city. Specifically, what we have here is a loop or highway that goes around the whole city called 1604. And when a storm approaches from the northwest, it almost interacts with the highway as if the highway were a wall. Obviously, that's not actually happening, but you go online, you go on like the San Antonio subreddit or something like that, and a lot of people are joking, will the 1604 wall hold? Will it dissipate the storm? And so I found that really interesting. I think science begins through observations just like this, where it might not seem as if there is any reasonable correlation, but in reality there may be. And so I wanted to look into this a little bit deeper. I've always been interested in storms and meteorology and atmospheric sciences. It is my focus area at UTSA, and therefore I wanted to look at this project and see if there was any validity to these observational claims that people were making, myself included. So, just to give a quick thanks to my research advisor, Dr. Masa Afra. She's been a great help. She's supported me a lot in this project and taught me a lot of very valuable skills. And TA Michaela Garcia for definitely helping me through a lot of those GIS challenges. So thanks guys for the continued support. So let's talk about the hypothesis. I'm just going to read it. First, due to urban heat island effect, storms approaching San Antonio from the northwest tend to strengthen or take a persistent course towards regions of high surface temperature, suggesting the influence of localized urbanization on storm systems. And in figure A, we have a raster of San Antonio's surface temperature, which is captured by the Landsat 9 satellite. This information is collected from the U.S. Geological Survey, and that data comes specifically from Landsat 9. Some interesting information: on June 18th, 2000, NASA reported that urban areas with high concentrations of buildings, roads, other artificial surfaces retain heat and lead to warmer surrounding temperatures. This is the foundation of urban heat island effect. In general, global warming has been a prominent proponent of increased rainfall and more extreme weather events, and will continue as global warming continues. So this is observed in science and a lot of scientific literature. You can find these activities occurring. So that's the hypothesis. The introduction here is we're going to be looking at westerlies specifically. Westerlies are just prevailing winds that blow west to east, directing specifically here storms into South Texas, right? So does urbanization have an influence on these northwestward approaching storms, right? Urban regions such as San Antonio experience higher surface temperatures due to anthropogenic heat output, right? As we just discussed before, San Antonio is no stranger to urban heat island effect. So do these high localized surface temperatures affect storm magnitude and direction, right? So starting this research project, we of course need to develop a method, right? So I decided to pick what I call two areas of study, or I'm going to refer to them as AOS in this research project. AOS 1 is the general study area used to monitor the storms as it approaches from the northwest, right? And we can see AOS 1 visualized right here. It's this large rectangular area. I included a region here west of San Antonio, mainly because this is where the storms are approaching from, or the specific storm that we're going to be looking at is approaching from kind of the northwest. So I wanted to have kind of a test area to see what was happening with the storm as it entered our area of study. AOS 2 includes a subregion within AOS 1. This subregion is intended to demonstrate the region of extreme surface temperature, right? Everything kind of to the west of this extreme surface temperature area, or AOS 1, has a much lower surface temperature, right? And this is where the storm is coming from, and we want to see the interaction of the storm with the hottest surface temperature area of our urban center, right? So you can see AOS 2 has been labeled here. This is just created as a regular polyline tool in ArcGIS and is included here. So next we're going to move on to our weather stations, right? Of course, in order to understand what's happening with the storm, we need meteorology data, right? So I have selected 4 stations for this research project. And I selected stations that are kind of running along the storm's path or trajectory. In this case, I'm using the Government Canyon Station, which is the most westward station, and then we're moving eastward from there into the San Antonio Northwest Station, and then to the San Antonio I-10 Station. Not labeled in this image here is also the San Antonio International Airport, and then at the end of each weather station here, I have the available data that we will be using from these stations. Primarily temperature and wind data from the first 3 stations, and then barometric pressure data from the San Antonio International Airport. Next, we move on to our storm, right? This storm occurred on August 31st, 2025. It was a pretty classic westerly style storm as it approached from the northwest. This little graphic here is collected from the NOAA Weather and Climate Toolkit. It uses radar reflectivity from the KWERX, I believe it is. I'm sorry, KEWX station located in New Braunfels, Texas. You can actually see the origin of the radar ping right here. That little kind of black area is basically exactly where the radar is. Just kind of a brief overview of like what radar is. It uses radio waves emitted from the weather station. These radio waves work a little bit like sonar. They use returning signals as an echo, and it interprets this information to gather reflectivity of the atmosphere, or what is happening in the atmosphere, right? And it uses length of time and return intensity to determine the magnitude of the storm. If it returns faster or if it returns with a higher intensity, and that means the storm is more intense in and of itself. And this is measured in decibels of reflectivity. And we will use this metric to understand the storm intensity at each weather station. Now, we're not collecting the reflectivity from the actual weather station itself, but what we're doing is using those point locations to determine what the reflectivity is based on the data collected from the NOAA and Weather Climate Toolkit. Just some more information about the storm here. Again, it occurred on August 31st, 2025, and we will kind of be observing the storm between 5:50 Central Standard Time and 6:57 p.m. Central Standard Time. So next, what we need to do is collect the surface temperature, right? There's 2 key elements here. It's the storm data and the surface temperature data, right? We are using, like I said before, data collected from the Landsat 9 satellite. This data is collected from the USGS Earth Explorer website. It's a pretty neat little tool that allows you to download infrared imagery captured from the satellite itself, and you can use this data and basically just drop it into ArcGIS, put a nice little raster gradient on it, and collect your data that way. And so here we have the bands specifically from the infrared camera that we will be using. Bands 4, bands 5, and bands 10 are processed with some fancy mathematical equations in ArcGIS to give us an accurate surface temperature reading at the time of that image capture. So this gives us our primary surface temperature here, and this is what we're going to be using to interact with the storm. Unfortunately, the Landsat 9 satellite is in what's called a sun-synchronous orbit, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean it passes over our study area that often, maybe once or twice a month. So in this case, we were only able to capture imagery on September 1st, 2025, which is a day after our storm, right? So hopefully in the future we can get some more correlating data, or we can use storms that occurred on the same day as Landsat 9 image capture, just so our data is a little more correlating. So next, which I find to be a big challenge in this project, is topographic analysis, right? The San Antonio, greater San Antonio region has some interesting topography. Specifically to the north of San Antonio, we have what is called the Balcones Escarpment, right? And the Balcones Plateau is, the Edwards Plateau is this kind of region of higher elevation that's north of San Antonio, right? And there's this drop off as you come south off of the Edwards Plateau into the Gulf Coastal Plains, which is exactly where San Antonio resides, or at least the majority of the urban area, right? So what is the relationship between this storm, or storms in general, and the topographic changes? I think this is something that we really need to look into more, because if we're going to say, well, hang on, our correlation here is between urban heat island effect and storms, well, it might not be, right? It might be due to that topographic change. The higher elevation Edwards Plateau, the air is much drier, it's a little bit cooler. As the storm passes over that plateau, it drops into the Gulf Coastal Plains, an area of higher humidity. This could absolutely affect storms, right? I think more research on my part needs to be done to better understand what happens in similar environments around the world. Higher humidity, higher temperature, does it boost the storm? Does it decrease the storm's intensity? What happens here, right? So this is a big consideration here, and definitely why the project is nowhere near being completed because of this, right? So we will definitely look into that further. Next, I would just like to go over the storm approach visualization. Like I said before, we will be collecting decibels of reflectivity data at each weather station, right? And we have a nice little line plot here that kind of shows us what's happening as the storm moves through the day, right? So here is our visual radar representation, right? 5:55 Central Standard Time to 6:37 Central Standard Time. And we just have this nice little visualization of the radar as the storm approaches, right? And just so you understand, we are collecting that reflectivity from each station at each time stamp. And here are these timestamps down below. Each station is labeled with a different color line, and we can kind of see what's happening with the reflectivity here. There's not much revealing about this information. Unfortunately, I believe that I need to collect more data on a longer time frame in order to really understand what's happening with the storm. But you can generally see here what's happening with reflectivity. The next part here is wind analysis. I think this is the most fruitful data set because it definitely shows a significant change, right? And in this case, we are looking at wind speed and maximum wind gust. Right now, remember, we are collecting our data from east to west along the storm's path and trajectory. On the left here, we have Government Canyon Station, which is our westward most station, and then we move eastward towards the IH-10 West Station, right? In this case, we see an increase in wind speed, increase in maximum wind gust, which is pretty expected for a storm as it's entering the region, right? A low pressure front is definitely going to bring in some higher wind speeds, right? But what's interesting here is we see an increase in overall wind speed as we get closer to the urban center or closer to our area of study number 2, right? So this is alluding to the possibility that the storm at least by wind data, is increasing in intensity as it approaches the city. Now again, what is this due to? Is it due to urban heat island effect, or is it due to topographic changes? We're not sure, but this is interesting data, and it shows us that there is a relationship here and that a change is occurring. Next, we will look at temperature analysis, right? Again, I'm putting emphasis on this topographic region here, what is occurring, right? But in our northwest station, we have some of our highest temperatures of around 95 degrees. Yes, it gets pretty hot here. This is in Fahrenheit, with a significant drop off down to really just below, probably 74, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, right? This is our storm entering the region. This is our storm passing directly over that weather station, and we're looking at these changes, right? Same thing happens over here, right? It's getting hot during the day, clear sunny conditions, and then the storm enters the region, our low pressure front enters, and we have a drop off in temperature, right? There is not much difference between these two graphs, right? This is more west and this is more east. I don't see any significant data here, and I think as far as temperature goes, more data definitely needs to be collected. So that brings us to our conclusion, right? So some of the highest wind speeds and gusts occur as the storm approaches our area of study 2, which we talked about before, right? Temperature analysis is inconclusive. It requires more data from a larger study area. As I have said ad nauseum, topography could affect storm intensity, right? More research needs to be done on topographic changes and what that means, how that affects storms, right? But this paired with localized urban surface temperature may have an impact on storms. Maybe the two are affecting the storms individually or separately, possible, but these are all things that we need to look into for sure. Wind results are positive and indicate an increase in storm intensity as it approaches the San Antonio urban heat island zone, but that's about it. So, discussion, right? Essentially, like I said before, we definitely need to collect more data from a larger region to track a storm's initial behavior and subsequent reaction, upon entering the urban heat island zone, right? More data needs to be collected and visualized and understood, right? We need to take into consideration the topography of the Edwards Plateau Gulf Coast Plains transition zone, right? Use other case examples where maybe there's similar changes, right? Other cities where similar topography changes occur, and see what the effects are there. Install or collect data from personal weather stations along storm paths. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of data to be collected. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of weather stations further west of San Antonio, right? So it'd be cool to be able to see the data changes as the storm approaches on a longer path or a further path from the city, right? What's happening further up in the Edwards Plateau? Are there any changes happening out there, right? Because then we can say, okay, well, there's no changes. The storm is relatively static, right, as it's approaching, but as it enters the San Antonio region, it suddenly increases in magnitude and intensity, right? That's another hypothesis in and of itself. Right. But it'd be cool maybe to get some PR things involved here, or to get some personal residents who just have their own personal weather stations at home who could collect data and send it my way. That would be awesome. Study other urban regions, like I said before, with different local climates and topographies to make comparisons. Expand remote sensing techniques to better monitor storms for various qualities. Surface temperature isn't the only quality that these satellites capture. There's a lot of other data that can be captured from these satellites, air quality, things such as that. That would be really interesting to look at and get data from. Otherwise, that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, suggestions. This project is nowhere near being finished. This is more of just the beginnings. I will probably be posting more updates as I collect more data, as I continue along. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will be back with more updates in the future.